Welcome back, guys. In today's episode, I'm sharing 10 true, disturbing stories about the Appalachian Mountains. These stories will make you think twice before wandering too far into the forest alone. But before we begin, please consider subscribing, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Let me know where you're watching from. Thank you all. Now let's start. That afternoon, I'd planned a short solo hike, just a few hours out and back. Nothing extreme. I was doing field notes for a course I'd already mentally checked out of, but I'd promised myself I'd finish cataloging a specific moss cluster near some deadfall off trail. Not glamorous, I know. Still, I'd gotten attached to it. The way it grew in fractal spirals, wrapping around bark like it knew secrets. Things like that get under your skin when you spend enough time staring at lichen through a hand lens. But I wasn't paying attention to the light. I noticed it dimming, sure, but I figured I had time. I had my map, my compass. The trail wasn't even a mile back. I'd marked my position in pencil in the margin of the map and made a mental note of landmarks. Split boulder, bent tree, that kind of thing. I was methodical. Confidence feels like armor right up until it slips. I stood, shook out my legs, turned to head back, and the trail was gone. Not obscured, gone. Where I'd walked in, now there was only a sweep of ferns and bramble, not flattened, not trampled. Just thick and untouched, like no one had passed through in weeks. I circled for a while, tried to reorient myself by slope, direction, the sun, but the canopy was dense. The light beneath it wasn't changing in any way that made sense. It felt like I was walking inside a sealed bottle. No big deal, I thought. Downhill is the smart move. Gravity leads to people. Except it didn't. I started down, confident the ranger station was that way. The path was uneven but manageable. I even recognized the tree I'd passed earlier. A gnarly old thing with a bulge in the bark that looked disturbingly like a human mouth mid-scream. I passed it, noted it again, and kept moving. 10 minutes later, I passed it again, uphill this time. I stopped cold. That was the first moment it hit me. Something is wrong here. There was no breeze. No bird song. Not even the hum of insects. Nothing. Just the sound of my own boots in the leaves and the uneven beat of my heart. I sat on a rock and pulled out the map. Tried plotting a course back using terrain. But the lines didn't match what I saw. Slopes curved the wrong way. Rises appeared where the map showed flat ground. It was like the landscape had shifted when I wasn't looking. Then I heard the footsteps. Faint. Behind me. Just a few paces off. Not close enough to feel immediate, but not far enough to dismiss. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. They moved when I moved. They stopped when I stopped. I spun around, fast. No one. I waited. Listened. My ears strained until they hurt. I even held my breath, desperate to hear better. Nothing. Hello? I called. I made my voice casual, upbeat, like I wasn't already way past calm. Silence, but not absence of sound. A silence that pressed in. Like the woods themselves were holding their breath. I didn't like that, so I chose a new plan. Upward, higher ground might give me a point of reference. Plus, it put distance between me and whatever was behind me. The climb was rough, slippery in places. Mud sucked at my boots. I used trees for balance. Eventually, I reached a crest. That's when I saw the first cairn. Stacked rocks, deliberate, balanced too well to be chance. I hadn't made it, I was sure. I moved forward and saw another, then a third. Each had a tuft of moss tucked under the top rock, fresh, bright green, the same kind I'd been sketching earlier. Breadcrumbs, I thought, but they didn't feel like a trail back. They felt like a path inward. I kept walking. I don't know why. Maybe because standing still felt worse. Maybe because part of me wanted to believe there was a rational explanation at the end. That's when I saw her. She stood in the middle of a moss-covered hollow beyond a line of spruce, still, like she'd been waiting. Her hair was gray and coarse, hanging straight like wet rope. She wore a loose, faded jacket that might have once been blue. Her back was to me, arms at her sides. I froze. Relief and unease wrestled in my chest. I stepped forward. "Excuse me, hi. Sorry. I think I'm a little turned around." She turned. Slow, effortless. Her face was blank, not surprised, not smiling, just neutral. Her eyes moved over me. My pack, my boots, the sky. "There's food at the cabin," she said. "You passed it. We share it with hikers." The way she said it was flat, memorized, like she was reciting lines, not speaking to me. My gut twisted. "That's nice of you," I said. I tried to sound light, but my voice wobbled. "I should probably just head back." She tilted her head slightly, like a dog hearing something strange. "You look cold," she said. "Come down. You'll be safe." The word down snagged in my head. The way she said it didn't mean lower in elevation. It meant deeper. "I'm okay," I said, stepping back. My heel slipped on moss. I almost fell. Her foot shifted forward. I turned and walked. Fast. Not quite running, but I could feel her eyes. I didn't look back. Every instinct screamed not to. Eventually the woods thinned. The pressure eased. I saw the ranger station again. Only, it didn't look the same. The windows were boarded from the inside. The paint was faded and peeling. The place looked abandoned for years. My stomach sank, but my car was there. It looked real, solid. I made for it like it was the last raft off a sinking ship. Then I saw them. 3 men, standing in shadow near the back of the building. Still, watching. I didn't stop. Fumbled my keys. My fingers didn't feel like mine. I glanced up. She was there. The woman. Standing with them now, like she'd always been there. Like this had always been the plan. One of the men nodded, just once. The smallest movement I've ever seen, but it hit me like a shout. I got in the car, slammed the door, locked it, started the engine. The headlights cut through the trees but didn't make anything better. I backed out so fast I nearly clipped a stump. Then I drove. No plan, no GPS. It refused to load anyway. Every road looked wrong. Trees pressed close. Turns looped back. I talked to myself just to stay focused. Finally, power lines, gas lamps, civilization. I pulled into the first town I saw. No idea where I was. I just needed people, lights, anything. I parked under a buzzing sign outside a convenience store and sat there, heart pounding like it wanted out of my chest. That's when I noticed it. On the back window, 3 smeared letters traced through the grime. SF. Just that, nothing else. I stared too long. My brain threw out possibilities. Single female, safe following, stay forever. None of them felt good. I wiped it away with my sleeve, left a streak. Didn't matter. The mark was gone, but not the feeling. I haven't been back. My cousin Daniel had been pestering me for months about going on this real hiking trip with him, somewhere remote, somewhere barely touched. The sort of place where, according to him, you remember who you are. That's an actual quote. He said it while sharpening a hatchet on my kitchen counter, like he was auditioning for a survival show. Daniel's always been that guy. Long hair, flannel shirts in July, one of those metal mugs clipped permanently to his backpack. He grew up climbing trees and reading strange wilderness guides. I've always liked nature in moderation. Day hikes, sure. Campfires with marshmallows, great. But spending 3 days in the middle of the Appalachian wilderness, miles from any cell tower, that sounded like a great way to lose your sanity. Or, more realistically, step in poison ivy and spend a night crying into your oatmeal. But he wouldn't drop it. Every time we saw each other, family barbecues, group chats, random texts, he brought it up. "You need this," he'd say, like he was prescribing medication. "You need to unplug, you'll come back clearer." Eventually, I caved. Not because I believed him, but because I figured it was easier to go once and shut him up for a year than keep dodging his relentless outdoors evangelism. We left on a Friday morning, just after sunrise. Daniel picked me up in his rust-colored Subaru that smelled like pine needles and old trail mix. The back was stuffed to the ceiling packs, sleeping bags, a small cooler, enough gear to invade a small island. As we drove, the towns got smaller, the road signs rarer. Eventually, the highway gave way to cracked asphalt, then gravel, then just dirt and trees. It felt like we were reversing out of civilization. The silence hit first. Somewhere around the last bend, Before we reached the trailhead, I realized I couldn't hear anything but the tires crunching and the occasional bird. No distant cars. No planes overhead. Just a thick, oppressive quiet that made me swallow harder than I meant to. The trail started off easy enough. Slight incline, plenty of sunlight, a few scattered signs. But Daniel wanted to go off the loop, away from the designated campsites. He said he had a spot in mind, up near a ridge with a full panoramic view of the valley. I followed him, because I didn't know any better and figured if he'd been out here before, he knew where he was going. By mid-afternoon, I was wrecked. My shoulders ached from the pack, my legs trembled from the climbs. I regretted every granola bar I didn't bring. Daniel, meanwhile, bounded ahead like a mountain goat. Every so often he'd stop, grin back at me, and say something annoyingly upbeat like, "Almost there." I stopped believing him around the third time. Eventually, we found a clearing. Decent size, flat ground, enough space for the tent, surrounded by trees that looked identical. Honestly, if you spun me in a circle and asked which direction we came from, I wouldn't have had a clue. We set up camp, cooked over a small fire, and talked about nonsense until the sun dipped below the trees. It wasn't bad, really. Kinda nice. By the time we crawled into the tent, I was so tired I think I passed out mid-sentence. The next day started fine too. We broke camp, ate cold oatmeal that tasted like cardboard sadness, and kept moving. That's when I started to notice little things. The trail behind us never looked quite right. We'd climb a long, steep section, but when I glanced back, it didn't seem that steep. Or we'd descend for what felt like ages, then turn around and see barely any incline. I told myself it was just fatigue, maybe dehydration. Or maybe I just wasn't used to hiking for hours without clear markers. Still, something tugged at me, a nagging discomfort. By early afternoon, we were completely off the marked trail. Daniel claimed we were cutting across to reach the ridge faster, but the terrain didn't match anything on the map. At one point, he turned it upside down and squinted like that would help. Not exactly confidence-inspiring. Then we found another clearing. I froze. It was the same one. Same oddly shaped stump near the center. Same moss-covered rock with the split down the middle. Same little pile of charred wood, like someone had made a fire there before. Like we had. I pointed it out to Daniel. He looked around, laughed, and said something like, "Hey, maybe the terrain just repeats." Sure, maybe. Except I remembered how I folded the tarp the night before. It was still there. Still folded. Still tucked near the rock. We camped again because we didn't really have a choice. The sun was going down, and neither of us wanted to walk blind through an unfamiliar forest. That night, I slept like garbage. I woke up constantly, heart racing, unsure why. The air felt too still. The kind of stillness that makes you feel like you're being watched. Every time I woke, I checked the tent zipper. Made sure our packs were zipped. I even held my breath to hear better. Nothing. No wind, no bugs. Just silence that made your ears ring. Morning 3 is when it tipped from weird to wrong. I unzipped the tent and stepped out. Our gear was out. Not spilled, laid out. Like someone had unpacked everything with care and lined it up on the ground. Food, clothes, supplies. Each item arranged like it had been inventoried. I stared for a long time. Too long, probably. My brain just couldn't process it. Daniel came out, saw it, and went pale. I asked if he'd done it. He shook his head, slow and stiff, like his neck didn't want to move. We didn't talk much after that. We just packed what we could and kept moving. That day, the forest stopped pretending. No matter where we turned, we circled back to places we'd already seen. A dead tree shaped like a tuning fork, a cluster of rocks that looked like stacked teeth. The same trail marker carved into bark, even though we hadn't seen any official signs in hours. Daniel gave up pretending he knew where we were. The map, useless. Might as well have been blank. That night, we barely ate. Not that we could have if we wanted to. When we checked the packs the next morning, all the food was gone. Everything edible, protein bars, trail mix, even those gross meal pouches, vanished. The rest of our stuff was untouched. Nothing broken, nothing missing. Just the food, like someone was picking and choosing. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat up by the fire, poking at it with a stick, listening to the woods not make noise. Around midnight, the trees started shifting, not moving, just changing. The spacing between them, first tight, then wide, like something was adjusting the layout while I wasn't looking. Out of the corner of my eye, I kept catching flickers, quick flashes of movement, but every time I turned my head, there was nothing. The air felt thick, like breathing through wool. My arms broke out in goosebumps, even though it wasn't cold. I whispered Daniel's name until he woke. He sat up, blinked at me. Before I could say anything, we both heard it. Fabric, sliding. We turned. Our packs stacked and zipped, tied together with cord, were side by side again. Open. I don't remember what we said. I just remember the look on his face. We didn't pack. We grabbed, shoved whatever we could into our arms and ran. We left the cookware, the extra clothes, the blanket I'd had since college. We didn't care. We just ran. The forest blurred past us. I think I tripped 4 times in the first 10 minutes. My legs were bleeding. Daniel cut his palm on something but didn't stop. We just kept crashing through brush until we were back on the trail. Just like that. Red markers, worn dirt, civilization, or the edge of it. One step we were lost. The next we were found. We didn't speak, just walked, one foot in front of the other, afraid if we stopped we'd be pulled back in. When we heard the highway, I almost cried. We saw the car, climbed in, sat there in silence. Daniel didn't even start the engine for a full minute. Just stared straight ahead. The only time he spoke was at the gas station. He said, "I'm never going back there." I said, "Yeah, me neither." And we meant it. To this day, I can't look at a topographic map without my stomach flipping. If I see a trailhead sign, I look away. I was 31 when it happened. Work had been draining the life out of me. Not in a dramatic, I hate my job kind of way, but in that quiet, slow burn way where every day just chips away at you a little more. Meetings that went nowhere, people asking the same questions. Even the coffee started tasting stale. There was this low hum of restlessness in my chest that wouldn't quit. So I decided to get out. Not a vacation, not some all-inclusive resort or Airbnb with Wi-Fi and a Bluetooth speaker. I wanted the opposite of all that. No itinerary, no email, no reception. Just me, the road, and the woods. I packed my hatchback with the basics. A decent tent, a cooler full of easy food, my hiking boots, and a plain notebook. That last one felt important, something to keep track of where I'd been when I'd stopped, just in case. I didn't tell many people where I was going, just said I was taking some time off. My route wasn't really a route, more of a vague goal. Drift through the Appalachian Mountains, camp wherever looked good, no campgrounds, no check-ins, just patches of ground that felt right. That first day I drove for hours, music low, windows halfway down. The roads twisted and narrowed the deeper I got into the mountains, until it felt like the trees had closed in behind me. My phone lost service almost immediately, but I liked it. There was something comforting about being unreachable. The first 2 nights I found simple clearings just off dirt roads. Nothing fancy. I pull in, set up quickly, eat from a can or packet, and go for short walks to loosen my legs. I wasn't pushing it, just existing. The tent felt safe enough. I kept it zip tight, with the car never more than a quick sprint away. Paranoia or common sense, I wanted an exit plan if anything went wrong. By the 3rd night, I was settling into the rhythm. No strange noises. No encounters. Just the steady quiet of being completely alone. Then came the 4th night. I had driven longer than I meant to that day. It was getting late. The sun dipped low, shadows stretched long, but I didn't feel tired. I passed a few spots that didn't feel right, too open, too sloped. Then I saw a break in the trees. A path, wide enough for the car, leading to a clearing that looked untouched. No fire pits. No tire tracks, just flat earth and mossy rocks. It looked forgotten. I pulled in slowly, parked with the nose of the car facing the road, and got out. The air felt heavy there. Not threatening, just off. Quieter than usual. The ground was soft, still damp from an old rain. The kind of dirt that leaves a solid imprint. I pitched the tent close to the car again. Ate beans straight from the can. Flipped through my notebook. Wrote down the time, 8:15, and the mileage from my last stop. That detail sticks with me. I remember writing it down like I was clocking into something, like I had just punched a ticket I couldn't unpunch. I went to sleep around 10, bundled in my sleeping bag. Sometime after midnight, I snapped awake. It wasn't a slow waking. It was sudden, alert. At first, I thought maybe the wind had shifted. Maybe a branch had fallen. Then I heard it again. A soft crack, like a twig breaking. Not loud, just enough to make me listen harder. Then another, spaced out. Slow, like steps. Something was moving, and it wasn't rushing. I reached for my flashlight, sat up slowly, and unzipped the tent just enough. I stuck my arm out and swept the beam across the trees. The light jumped from trunk to trunk. Nothing moved. But the sound stopped the moment the light came on. That was almost worse than seeing something. I waited. Nothing. No more sounds. I sat like that for what felt like forever, breathing through my mouth to stay quiet. Eventually, the adrenaline wore off. My body gave up. I slumped back down, flashlight still in my hand, until I drifted off. When I stepped out the next morning, I almost tripped. There were footprints everywhere, circling the tent, looping in tight, erratic patterns, sometimes overlapping, sometimes spaced so far apart they looked like long, deliberate strides. And they weren't boot prints. Not even shoes. These were bare feet. Wide, long, with a strange arch, like the toes had splayed too far. I crouched down, checking the depth. The ground had enough give to show detail. What I saw made my skin go cold. Human in shape, but not right. Too flat in some places, too sharp in others. Like someone had walked circles around me for hours, pressing just hard enough to prove they'd been there, but leaving no trail in or out. At least a dozen prints, maybe more. I stopped counting when I realized they didn't lead anywhere. Just circles, then nothing. I didn't make breakfast, didn't write in the notebook. I tore down the tent, threw everything in the car, and started driving, deeper into the mountains. Don't ask me why. Maybe I thought I could outrun the weirdness. Maybe I thought if I just got far enough away, it wouldn't matter. By mid-afternoon, I found another spot. Tighter, more enclosed, beside a narrow creek winding through a shallow dip in the trees. It felt like a hiding place. The sun barely reached the ground. I set up again. Ate cold tuna from the can, sat by the water, watching it shimmer in a slow, hypnotic way. The air felt like it was holding its breath. When I went to log the time and mileage again, my hand froze. The notebook was gone. I searched the car, under the seats, in the trunk, between the cooler and the gear bag, then the tent, the jacket pocket. I even backtracked a little. Nothing. I knew I'd had it that morning. I'd flipped through it. I'd thought about whether to keep writing after what I'd seen, but it wasn't there. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Every noise felt sharper. The creek, which had been a soft trickle earlier, now sounded more like shifting gravel. Then I heard it again, measured splashes, like someone walking through water, one step at a time, then pausing, then doing it again. It didn't stop. For hours. I stayed inside the tent. Flashlight off, I didn't want to know. I lay there, barely blinking, listening. Slow, calculated movement just outside, like it knew I was awake, like it was waiting. When the sun rose, the sound was gone. I opened the flap and stepped out, half expecting more prints. The creek looked normal, the tent untouched. Then I saw the notebook. It was sitting on the hood of my car. Wet, warped, even. I picked it up carefully, flipped it open. My entries were still there. Dates, notes, mileage, exactly as I had written them. But each one had a number beside it. 1, 2, 3, 4. The handwriting was shaky, and it wasn't mine. At the bottom of the last page was a 5th entry, written in darker, pressed down ink. 5. My throat went dry. My pulse pounded so hard I could hear it. I didn't think. I just moved. Didn't fold the tent. Didn't pack the gear. I threw whatever was loose into the car and turned the key before the door shut. The tires spit gravel as I reversed. Then I gunned it forward back to the road. I didn't stop, not when the road narrowed, not when branches scraped the roof, not when the gas light came on. I drove until I saw power lines. My cousin Nate had this idea to get out of town for a few days. He'd found a cabin way out in the Appalachian mountains, buried deep in the woods where no one goes unless they don't want to be found. He said it was cheap, quiet, and surrounded by hiking trails, the kind of place you'd go to write a manifesto. But honestly, I needed the break. At the time, I was living in a cramped apartment above a laundromat in Raleigh. The machines downstairs ran all night, and the people outside treated the parking lot like a debate stage. I hadn't had silence in months. So when Nate mentioned the trip, I didn't hesitate. I threw some clothes, a flashlight, a beat-up copy of Pet Sematary, and snacks into a duffel bag. That was it. Nate picked me up before sunrise, and we hit the road. The drive took forever. Once the highways ended, the roads got narrower, steeper, and more cracked the higher we climbed. Eventually, the GPS gave up completely, like it decided, "You're on your own now." From there, it was dirt roads, then a gravel path that looked more like a dry riverbed than a driveway. But we made it. The cabin sat wedged into a slope, swallowed by thick trees. It was smaller than I expected. One main room with a tiny kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a bathroom that looked untouched since the 70s. Cracks in the sink patched with duct tape, a sagging shower rod that seemed one sneeze away from collapse. There was no TV, no Wi-Fi, barely any phone service. We checked our phones and laughed when the single bar vanished like a dying bulb. The only connection was an old beige landline by the door, the kind with a spiral cord that always tangled. Nate called it the emergency phone, like we were in a slasher movie. That first night was great. We grilled burgers on a rusty fire pit, drank warm beer under the trees, and traded stories until we had none left. It was quiet, so quiet it made my ears ring, the kind of silence you don't realize you've missed until it surrounds you. We ended the night playing cards at the wobbly kitchen table. Around midnight, I crashed on the lumpy mattress in the back bedroom. I lay there staring at the ceiling, realizing I could hear nothing but my own breathing. No traffic, no voices, just nothing. The next day was calm. We hiked in the morning, ate sandwiches for lunch, and mapped through the afternoon. Around 3, Nate said he was going to gather firewood before it got dark. He drove off in the truck, said he'd be back in an hour. I stayed behind, sprawled on the couch with my book. The silence was strange, but I was getting used to it. No distractions. Just me and a paperback I'd been meaning to finish. Then the phone rang. It was loud, much louder than I expected. That sharp, metallic ring, like someone striking a dinner bell in my ear. I jumped, nearly dropped the book. For a moment, I just stared at it. Nobody had that number. No one knew we were here. I picked it up, half expecting a wrong number. "Hello?" Silence. Then a voice, low and halting. "Male. This is Alan." That was it. I didn't know any Alan. I asked who he was. He paused, then repeated himself, slower this time. "Alan, your delivery man. Food delivery." I blinked. We hadn't ordered anything. Couldn't order anything. We had no service. I told him he must have the wrong number. Another pause. Then, "Are you there alone?" That question hit differently. It was the kind of question that makes your skin crawl, like realizing you've been watched. My grip on the phone tightened. Every creak in the floor seemed louder. I almost lied. Almost said Nate was home, but the truck was gone. If this guy was nearby, he'd know. So instead, I said calmly, "My uncle's here." The silence dragged. Then, flat and robotic, he said, "You are alone." Click. I stood there holding the deadline to my ear. Then I moved. I locked every door and window. The bathroom window was the worst. No latch, just a warped wooden frame. I jammed a plunger against it and hoped. Then I peeked through the curtain near the couch. A car was in the driveway. Old, beat-up, silver-turned dull gray. Not Nate's. And it hadn't been there before. The driver sat perfectly still, facing the cabin, not moving, not even blinking. It was him. My stomach twisted. I ducked back behind the curtain, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I grabbed the phone again. It rang. I didn't answer. It rang again, each ring louder, or maybe just sharper against my nerves. I froze in the kitchen, staring at the phone like it might explode. When it stopped, I called 911. I spoke fast, voice low, giving the dispatcher everything I knew. A rented cabin, up Hillcrest Pass Road, past the old ranger station, maybe 10 miles north of Buckland. While I was talking, I peeked again. The car was reversing, slowly, carefully, not kicking up dust. Then the tires spun, and it disappeared behind the trees. I stayed on the line until the dispatcher said officers were on their way. It took time for them to reach us. 2 deputies arrived, asked me to wait on the porch while they checked in town. An hour later, they came back. There was a guy named Alan, worked at the diner in Buckland, washing dishes and running food. He admitted to making the call, said he thought we'd ordered something. When asked why he wanted to know if I was alone, he claimed he just wanted to talk to an adult. His mom, who ran the diner, backed him up. The officers gave him a warning, told him not to come near the cabin again. That should have been the end of it. But Nate wasn't satisfied. When he got back and I told him, he ripped the phone off the wall and called the diner directly. I watched him pace, jaw tight. "Yeah, I want to speak to Alan." A pause. "You were outside the cabin." "Why?" Another pause. Nate's eyes narrowed. Then he repeated what he'd heard, disbelief in his voice. "Lonely. He says he was lonely." Nate's voice dropped, quiet and dangerous. "If I ever see your car up here again, if I even hear you came within 10 miles of this cabin, I'll make sure you're lonely for the rest of your goddamn life." He hung up. We stayed the rest of the week, but it wasn't the same. The blinds stayed closed. The fire burned late. The hatchet stayed by the couch. Neither of us slept well. Every twig snap froze me. Every car on the road below made me hold my breath. We didn't stop in Buckland again. My buddy Drew and I had gotten into this habit of chasing out more remote and isolated campsites every chance we got. It started casual, with state parks and a few off-the-beaten-path trails. But after a while, we were picking spots way deeper into the Appalachian backcountry than any sane person had business going. The more unmarked the roads, the better. If the GPS turned into a featureless gray blob, we were exactly where we wanted to be. That weekend, we took it further than we ever had. We found this old logging road on a topographical map, the kind that barely exists anymore. We drove past the last ranger station, deeper into a forest that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The road narrowed to barely more than 2 ruts through the brush. At one point, we had to get out and move a down branch that had probably been there since spring. Roots pushed up through the gravel like the forest was reclaiming it in slow motion. When we finally parked, we couldn't even see the sky. The trees were so thick and high above us, the sun barely made it through. It felt like the rest of the world had dropped away behind us. That first night was solid. Uneventful, honestly. We set up camp next to this little moss-covered outcrop, cracked a couple beers, and got a fire going. I remember being weirdly proud of the steak I cooked directly on the coals. No pan, no foil, just fire and meat. We drank more than we probably should have, passed around a flask of Drew's weird honey whiskey, and stayed up too late swapping the same old stories. And the quiet, man. It was the kind of silence you don't realize you've been missing until you're in it. No cars, no hum of power lines, not even planes overhead. Just the flick of a bug near your ear or the crackle of the fire. We both knocked out hard that night, slept like rocks. The forest gave us nothing to worry about. Then Saturday rolled around. The whole day passed without anything strange. We did a short hike uphill, found an old deer blind someone had half built into a tree, then looped back down to camp before sunset. We ate, got the fire going again, and I remember leaning back in a cheap folding chair, just watching the flames do their thing, thinking about nothing at all. Then the scream hit us. It came from up the ridge. Not close, but not far either. Far enough that we couldn't see anything, but near enough that we felt it in our chests. A man's scream. High, strained, and way too long. I sat bolt upright. Drew was already on his feet. The scream cut through everything, the fire, the stillness, even the comfort of isolation we'd gotten used to. It was like the woods changed in an instant. 1 second peaceful, the next every hair on my arms was standing straight up. We didn't speak, just stared into the trees like they'd explain it to us. At first I wanted to believe it was some drunk hiker yelling for help. That happens sometimes. People get lost, panic, and make noise. But this didn't sound like panic. It sounded like something tearing itself apart. The longer it went on, the worse it felt. The scream didn't dip or stop for breath. It just kept going, ragged and brutal, scraping itself out of the guy's throat. It sounded angry and desperate at once, and by the end, it didn't feel entirely human. The unnerving part? We hadn't seen another person since we parked the truck, not even a footprint. The closest town, Cresswell, was miles and miles away on winding switchbacks barely passable. No signal, no rangers, no campers. Just us. And that scream. When it finally ended, the silence that followed felt unnatural. Like everything in the forest had paused. Even the fire seemed quieter. Drew picked up a heavy branch without a word. I kept the hatchet in my lap. We didn't talk. We barely moved. The air felt heavier. Like if we made too much noise, we'd call that scream back. Then we saw the light. At first, it looked like someone far off in the trees swinging a lantern. A soft, bobbing glow. Then, suddenly, a bright white flashlight beam sliced across the woods, right past our camp. I flinched so hard I nearly dropped the hatchet. Drew stood up, fully alert. A moment later, a figure stepped into the reach of our firelight. I didn't know what else to do, so I said, "Evening, man." The guy replied immediately, no hesitation, like he'd been waiting for us to speak. "Could you do me a favor?" His tone was flat, not tired. Not nervous, just flat, like he was asking someone to pass the salt. Drew and I both raised our makeshift weapons a little higher. I felt my stomach tighten in a slow, cold knot. "Depends on the favor," Drew said, steady but cautious. The man looked rough. Mud-smeared jacket, pants torn like he'd slid through half the mountain. His eyes were wide, like he'd seen something he couldn't process. He didn't seem aggressive, just drained. Empty. He asked to sit by the fire. We let him, but stayed on edge. He moved slowly, like every joint hurt. Once he sat, he stared into the flames for a long time without saying a word. Eventually I asked, "So, what's going on out there?" His name was Gary. He said he'd been camping with his coworker Ty, a bit further down the ridge. Sounded like a trip just like ours, trying to unplug and reconnect with something primal. Most of the day had been normal, he said. Good vibes. Then Ty snapped. I asked, "That screaming we heard, that was him?" Gary just nodded, still staring into the fire. Then he explained. Ty had started yelling out of nowhere. At first, just raw screaming. Then he came at Gary with a hatchet, full sprint. Gary said he barely got away. He grabbed his lantern and keys and just ran. They didn't bring guns, he said. Just a hatchet, one hatchet. The way he said it chilled me. Like the word itself hurt. I asked, "So he's still out here? Now?" Gary nodded slowly. Then the forest gave us another update. From the trees, maybe 30 feet away, way closer than before, the screaming started again, but this time it wasn't random. This time it was words. "I just want your balance, Gary. I want your balance, Gary. Where are you, Gary?" The voice was twisted, distorted in a way that made it sound almost inhuman. It wavered between a weird sing-song lilt and a low, broken growl, like something trying to imitate a person, but missing the mark. We killed our lights instantly, sat perfectly still. Our eyes scanned the tree line. I swear I heard Drew's breath catch. The voice moved past us, staggering, mumbling, calling Gary's name like it was a prayer and a curse rolled into one. We waited. The voice faded. Gary was shaking. It took him a while to get the rest out. He admitted he and Ty had taken a big dose of mushrooms that morning, 5 grams each. The trip had started off, beautiful forest alive, colors vivid, all of that. Then, around the 3.5-hour mark, Ty turned. He started whispering that Gary was hoarding the good energy, that he had to steal Gary's balance to fix his own bad trip. Then he snapped. For 2 hours straight, Ty's screams echoed through the valleys, sometimes close enough to feel, sometimes so far away it didn't make sense. The temperature dropped fast, and Ty had no coat, no light, just the hatchet. We were in no shape to hike out. Gary was still half tripping. Drew and I were sobered up by fear but wrecked from the booze and the cold. So we waited, jumpy as hell, listening for any sign he was near. Around 11, it went quiet. We thought maybe he'd passed out or wandered off. Then came another voice. Help, please. I'm lost. It sounded normal, calm, even weak. Way too close. We yanked Gary behind a big downed log and lit up the trees with everything we had. I had my 12 gauge, safety off. My 40 cal on my hip. Drew had his rifle and both his Glocks out. We weren't messing around anymore. Then a figure stepped into the light. Tall, heavy, drenched in sweat. Tai. He looked exhausted, hollowed out. He raised his hands like he was walking into a police station. Please, he said, I don't know what happened. I just want to go home. We didn't drop our weapons, but we let him talk. He swore he blacked out. Had no memory of chasing Gary. Claimed he woke up alone and terrified. He cried. Real tears. Real tears. We didn't believe a word of it, but we walked him down the trail anyway, guns up the whole time. Back at camp, we told Gary what happened. He didn't want to see Ty. Didn't say much at all. Just promised he'd scream if anything happened again. That night, the woods stayed silent. In the morning, Gary packed up and left without eating. He texted me from town later, said he made it back to his wife and kids safe. Said thanks. Even mentioned planning another trip someday. But Ty, the guy who stalked the mountains with a hatchet, screaming about balance, chasing ghosts, and his best friend in the middle of a bad trip, I'm never sharing a fire with him again. Gabe, my cousin, talked me into tagging along on the supply run through the Appalachian Mountains. He said it would only take a few hours, maybe most of the day. We'd drive out to drop off a load of stuff for a friend of his who lived way out in the woods, not just outside of town, but deep enough into the mountains that your GPS gave up before you were even close. I didn't really want to go. Honestly, I would have preferred spending my Saturday sleeping in and maybe ordering something greasy by noon. But Gabe had that kind of relentless optimism that was hard to argue with. Plus, he said it'd be good to get out for a bit, clear our heads, and get some air. He also bribed me with breakfast, real breakfast, diner style, and that pretty much sealed it. We hit the road early. It was still foggy out when we left, but the first couple of hours were uneventful. We listened to old rock on the radio, passed thermoses of coffee back and forth, and made fun of the guy in front of us who couldn't seem to pick a lane. The road started off wide and clean, but somewhere after the third or fourth turnoff, they began to narrow. First gradually, then not so gradually. By the time we got to where Gabe's directions told us to turn, we were no longer on pavement. It was just packed dirt with deep ruts and tire grooves. The road looked like it had been chewed up and spit out by logging trucks. My seatbelt locked every time we hit a dip, which was constant, and I kept grabbing the door handle on the sharper turns. Not because it helped, but because it made me feel like I was at least doing something. Eventually, we dipped into a long, winding stretch that was almost completely hidden by the forest. I'm not exaggerating when I say it felt like the trees were swallowing us. Thick limbs reached out overhead and tangled together until there was barely any sky left. Sunlight came through in slivers, but mostly it was just shade and shadow and a vague feeling that we were going somewhere we weren't supposed to be. When we finally reached the cabin, I almost missed it entirely. It was tucked into the side of a slope, like someone had tried to hide it from the world. If we hadn't known to look for it, we might have driven right past. There wasn't much to look at, just a small, weather-beaten structure with a porch that sagged slightly to one side, and a rusted-out truck that looked like it hadn't moved in a decade. The kind of place you'd expect to see in a movie right before something terrible happens. Gabe pulled up and turned off the engine. Here we are, he said cheerfully, like we hadn't just spent 2 hours navigating the world's most aggressive gravel road. We got out. No sign of anyone. No lights on. No dog barking. Just silence, and the sound of the engine ticking as it cooled down. Gabe looked around, frowning slightly. Weird. He said he'd be here. Maybe he's inside, I offered, not really convinced. The place looked deserted. Or out hunting, Gabe said with a shrug. He does that sometimes. Told me not to worry if he wasn't right there when we arrived. He didn't seem concerned, so I helped him unload. We started stacking boxes on the porch, canned food, bottled water, some tools. It felt like we were prepping for the end of the world. I asked him once who this guy was, and Gabe just said he was an old friend, which could mean anything coming from him. Gabe knows half the county. After a while, he decided to hang around, give the guy a chance to show up. I wasn't in the mood to sit around doing nothing, so I wandered a bit. Nothing far, just off to the edge of the clearing behind the cabin near the tree line. I figured I'd stretch my legs, maybe snap a photo or two. But then I noticed something. There was a path. Barely there, more like a subtle crease in the undergrowth. A narrow line that curved gently to the left, like something had passed through enough times to bend the grass and ferns. At first, I didn't think much of it, but when I looked at it again, it seemed different. I blinked. The trail no longer curved left. Now it seemed to go straight up the hill. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. It had shifted back, or maybe I'd imagined it. "Gabe," I called, not taking my eyes off it. "Can you come here?" He jogged over, still wiping his hands on his jeans. "What's up? Does that trail look weird to you?" He followed my gaze. "Looks like a regular trail to me." I glanced at him. "You sure? Doesn't it look like it changes direction?" He squinted. "I think you need more sleep, man." Then he clapped me on the shoulder and went back to stacking boxes. I stayed where I was. The trail still looked off, not in a dramatic way, not something you could capture on camera, but something about it kept shifting. I stared at it for a long time, trying to pin down what was wrong. And then, without fully meaning to, I stepped onto it. The first few steps felt normal, but then the air got heavy. Not hot, just thick, like I was walking through water. The trail dipped slightly, then rose again, then twisted to the right. Every turn looked just like the last, and soon I couldn't tell how far I'd gone. I turned around, expecting to see the cabin, but it wasn't there. Neither was the clearing. Just more trees, and that weird shifting trail. I should have turned back right then. I even told myself to, but I couldn't. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like curiosity, the kind that buzzes just under your skin. Like something was pulling me forward, showing me little glimpses of the next turn just to keep me moving. Then I saw it. At first, it was just movement. A low shape ahead, crouched like it was waiting for something. My heart started pounding. I froze, watching it. Slowly, it stood up. For a second, I thought it was Gabe. It had his height, his build, even his jacket. But when it turned, I saw the face. The jaw hung off-center, tilted too far down, like something had come unhinged. The skin around the eyes looked too smooth, stretched wrong. And the eyes, they just stared. Didn't blink, didn't shift. Just locked onto mine. Then it raised one hand. Slowly. Smoothly. Almost too smoothly. And it beckoned me forward. I didn't think. I turned and ran. The trail twisted violently under my feet. Forks appeared where there hadn't been any before, then vanished again. Every direction looked wrong. The air pulsed with something I couldn't name. I glanced down once and realized I couldn't see my own footprints anymore, like I'd never been there. Worse still, I could feel something behind me, not footsteps, not breathing, just presence, moving when I moved, stopping when I stopped. My legs ached. My throat burned. I was running blind, just hoping I wasn't getting deeper. And then, suddenly, the cabin appeared in front of me again, like someone had dropped it back into place. I stumbled out of the woods, gasping. The truck was still there. The boxes were still stacked. Nothing had changed, except me. Gabe looked up from the porch, eyebrows raised. "Where'd you go?" I couldn't answer. My whole body was trembling. I grabbed his arm, firm, and told him we needed to leave. Right now. He started to argue, but I didn't let him finish. I climbed into the driver's seat and turned the engine over myself. We pulled out of that clearing fast, dirt flying, wheels groaning. I kept my eyes straight ahead the entire time. I've been planning that Appalachian solo trip for months, not just buying gear and picking a trail. I mean spreadsheets, printed maps, online forums, weather history logs, food breakdowns by calorie and weight. I went full nerd on it. 4 days and 3 nights, ridge to ridge, close to 30 miles, give or take, depending on how ambitious I felt. I'd done hikes before. Plenty, actually. Mostly with friends, or through a local outdoors group. But this trip was different. There was something I needed from it that I didn't want to share with anyone. Maybe it was the idea of being totally on my own. No one to talk to. No one to compromise with. Just quiet. Just me, my pack, and the trail. So I parked at this little gravel pull-off near a place called Brewer's Gap. Nothing fancy, just a marker and a trailhead sign half-eaten by moss. I signed the register, locked my car, and started walking. The first day was uneventful in the best way, perfect rhythm. The trail climbed steadily, switchbacks cutting through dense woods, then flattening near the top. I hit my planned campsite by late afternoon. A flat patch just off a ridge, maybe 50 feet from the drop. No other hikers. No signs anyone had camped there in days. I set up the tent, boiled some water, and ate a bland pouch of lentils and rice I convinced myself was earthy. Then I read a few chapters of a beat-up copy of Dune I kept in a Ziploc. Slept like a log. But the next morning, that's when things started shifting. I was packing up, stuffing the last few things into my bag, when I noticed my cooking pot hanging from a low branch. It was maybe 20 feet away, swinging gently, like it had been placed there not long before. I froze, because I'd left it by the stove. I remembered clearly. Rolled up in the bandana I used as a pot holder, right next to the fuel canister. There was no wind that night. Nothing that would have tossed it that far. And it hadn't rolled. It was hanging by the handle, like someone had walked over, picked it up, and hooked it on a branch. I stood there for longer than I'd like to admit, just staring, trying to backtrack my own steps in my head. Did I move it and forget? Could I have done that in the dark without realizing? I wanted to believe that. I really did. So I forced myself to shrug it off, grabbed it, shoved it deep in my pack, and told myself I was being jumpy. Second night, different spot. I made it about 10 miles that day. Solid pace. Found a clearing a little ways off the main trail, not too far from a dry stream bed. Not as scenic, but it would do. Dinner was easy. Some kind of rehydrated bean stew with crushed chips on top. Not half bad after sweating for hours. I set everything up, zipped the tent, crawled into my sleeping bag, and drifted off. Until I woke up. There was this faint sound, almost like a whisper, but not a voice. It was the zipper. The tent zipper, moving. Slow, dragging. My heart locked up. I turned my head and the door was unzipped halfway. Just hanging open. I didn't move. Didn't even breathe. Eventually, I reached for my flashlight and swept it inside. Nothing, just my stuff. I sat up slowly, every inch of me buzzing, and peeked outside. Nothing. Just still woods. Trees like dark pencils. No footsteps. No rustling. I zipped it all the way open, stuck my head out, and shined the light around. Still nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself I'd been careless. Maybe I hadn't zipped it all the way. Maybe it snagged and slid open on its own. I even tested it the next morning. Couldn't get it to move without pulling hard. I barely slept that night. The third day, something in me was off. I tried to shake it, but the unease clung to me like sweat. The trail still looked right white blazes painted on trees, but it felt wrong. Subtly, like deja vu stretched too thin. I passed a tree with a hollow trunk, the inside blackened like it had been struck by lightning. Weird looking. Gnarled roots like fingers. I thought it was cool, so I stopped and snapped a picture. 3 hours later, I passed it again. Same tree. Same hollow trunk. Same ash at the base. I stopped, took my phone out, compared the pictures. Identical. I checked my map. I should have been 5 miles past that spot. I hadn't backtracked. I'd followed every blaze. No forks. I pushed on anyway. What else was I going to do? Sit down and cry? The trail cut downhill, met up with a narrow creek, and I followed it until I found a decent spot to camp. Figured the sound of water might help settle my nerves. Dinner was rushed. I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder. Even the stove's hiss made me twitch. Then I heard it. Something moved on the far side of the creek, not walking, dragging, slow, wet, deliberate, like someone crawling on hands and knees through damp leaves. I grabbed my light and shined it across. Nothing, just trees, brush, stillness, stillness. But the sound kept going, steady, rhythmic. I turned off the stove in silence, dead silence. That night, I dragged my entire pack into the tent. Didn't care how cramped it was. I tucked it against me like a child clutching a teddy bear. Around midnight, I woke again. There was a sound. Soft, papery. I turned. The pack was unzipped. I sat bolt upright. My food bag was gone. I scrambled out barefoot, the cold smacking me awake. The creek water soaked my pajama bottoms as I crossed. And there it was, the food bag, sitting on the far bank. Everything inside had been pulled out and arranged in a neat line. Oatmeal packets, trail mix, energy bars, each one spaced evenly side by side, like someone had laid them out to inspect them or count them. None were opened, none torn, just displayed. I gathered everything with shaking hands and shoved it back inside, glancing around the whole time, expecting something, anything to move. Nothing did. I zipped that pack closed so tight I thought the fabric would rip. Then I buried it in the bottom of my sleeping bag. I didn't sleep a second after that. The fourth morning, I was done. I was going to find a road, trail or not. My map was worthless. The blazes were a joke. I figured if I just headed downhill, I'd hit something man-made eventually. I pulled out my compass, and the needle spun like it was drunk. No steady north. Just this lazy, swaying circle. I picked a direction anyway and started walking. Kept the creek on my left. Figured it would veer off eventually. It didn't. Every time I thought I'd escaped it, there it was again. Same curve, same rocks. Same patch of moss. I wondered if I was hallucinating. I drank water, ate food, tried breathing exercises. Nothing helped. Hours passed. The sun crawled across the sky. I felt like I was walking in place. My legs buckled. My skin burned from brush and briars. My mind fuzzed out. I couldn't tell if I was sweating or freezing. My lips cracked. My fingertips numb. Then I stepped into a clearing and felt the world drop out from under me. It was my first campsite. Tent still staked. Fire ring still there. Ground sheet folded the same way I'd left it. And inside the tent, sitting neatly in the center, was my backpack. The same backpack I'd been carrying all day. I don't remember deciding. My body just moved. I ran, ripped the tent open, yanked the pack out and bolted. Didn't check the gear. Didn't care. I ran like something was behind me, even though I didn't hear a sound. Eventually the woods thinned, and I heard it. A low, steady hum. A highway. I pushed through the last of the trees and stumbled onto the shoulder. Cars flying by, oblivious, like I was crawling out of a dream. I stood there blinking in the sunlight. Then I kept walking until I found a ranger station. A few summers back, I decided to take a 4-day solo hike into the Appalachian Mountains. I wasn't originally planning to do it alone. My friends, Nate and Jonah, had been talking about it for weeks, saying they were in, hyping it up like it was going to be this great bro trip to disconnect from everything. But the morning we were supposed to leave, they both bailed. Jonah said his girlfriend had a family emergency, which probably meant a brunch with her mom. Nate just ghosted me entirely. No message. Nothing. I sat there in my living room with my pack already by the door, boots laced up, the cooler full, and I remember just staring at my phone, waiting for one of them to say, "Just kidding." It never came. And I was pissed at first, not gonna lie. But I'd already taken the days off work, already mapped the trail and stocked everything I needed. Honestly, I think some part of me was actually looking forward to doing it alone. So I threw my gear in the back of my old Subaru, topped off the gas, and headed out. By the time I reached the trailhead, it was almost noon. The parking lot was emptier than I expected. Just 2 other cars, dusty and parked off to the side like they'd been there for days. I signed the logbook at the start of the trail like you're supposed to, partly for safety, partly because it felt like the right thing to do. The trail started quiet, just like I wanted. The Appalachians have this way of feeling bigger the longer you're in them. The layers of trees and hills go on forever, and it's like every turn swallows you deeper into the green. There was something comforting about it. I hiked for about 6 hours that first day. Took my time, didn't rush. I passed a few faded markers nailed to trees, spotted a rabbit once, and that was about it for wildlife. Set up my tent near a shallow creek around dusk, boiled some ramen, cracked open a beer, and read a few chapters of The Martian. It was nice. Simple. That night, I slept hard. The kind of deep sleep that feels earned, where your body's too tired to think. The second day kicked my ass. The trail started climbing. Nothing impossible, but it was constant. My legs burned, and my shirt clung to me like wet paper. I kept expecting to run into other hikers, but there was just no one. Not a single voice, no distant barking dogs, not even smoke trails from other camps, just trees. Miles and miles of trees. And there's something that starts happening after enough hours alone like that. You stop expecting to see people. You forget about phones, cars, even time a little. You start to feel like you've slipped sideways from normal life. I made camp that night deeper into the woods, not near any landmarks, just a flat patch between some thick trees. Cooked another meal, read a little more, then sat there listening to the silence. That was the first time I noticed how loud silence can be out there. I told myself this was what I came for: peace, disconnection, the whole man versus nature thing. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel just a little off. Not scared, just alert. Like I kept catching something out of the corner of my eye that wasn't there. By the third day, I was used to the solitude, maybe even enjoying it. I moved slow that morning, took breaks more often, and didn't rush to get anywhere. I'd planned for 4 days, and I was ahead of schedule, so I figured I could ease into the next campsite. As the sun started dropping, I found what looked like the ideal spot. A wide ridge just off the trail, flat and open with a killer view. Honestly, it looked too perfect. I took a few steps toward it, even started unbuckling my pack, but then something hit me. I was visible from every side. Anyone walking below or from the opposite hill could see me clear as day. I stood there for a minute, trying to brush it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that setting up there would be like putting myself on display. So I backed off. Hiked down maybe 50 yards into thicker trees and found a decent spot. Nothing fancy, but hidden. I set up, made dinner, and got back into my book. It was a quiet evening. Moon was bright again, almost full, casting enough light that I barely needed my headlamp to read. I remember thinking how surreal it was. Sitting there alone, the world completely still. Then I heard something. It wasn't rustling, not the kind squirrels make. This was heavier, more deliberate, like someone taking careful, slow steps through thick brush. I clicked off my light immediately and froze. My ears were straining, heart starting to pound. I waited, hoping it was just some big raccoon or something. Then I heard voices. At first I couldn't make out words, just tones. Low, rhythmic, and slow. It took me a second to realize they weren't talking. They were chanting. It didn't sound aggressive, not exactly. But it wasn't casual either. It was ritualistic. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing. The voices were moving uphill, toward that ridge I almost camped on. I felt a weird mix of fear and relief. I was hidden. They wouldn't see me. But then, one voice stood out, sharp, clipped, and loud enough to carry. Someone had noticed something, and just like that, everything stopped. The chanting, the movement, dead silence. Then the footsteps changed direction. Downhill, toward me. I didn't think. I just slid into my sleeping bag like it would somehow protect me. My hands were shaking. I could hear the crunch of twigs under boots or whatever they were wearing. They were close. I could hear the breaths. 1, 2, maybe more people, moving slow, deliberate. Then they circled the tent. They didn't say anything, just walked in a wide arc, pausing, listening. I could hear the weight of each step in the dirt. Then the zipper started to open. I wanted to scream or move or do something, but I couldn't. My body had just locked. The flap opened, and a face leaned in. His skin looked like wax, stretched tight over bone. Eyes sunken, almost no whites. He was wearing this thick, dark robe. It looked heavy, layered, like something from a medieval cult movie. Way too much fabric for a muggy Appalachian night. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me. Then he leaned in, real close, close enough that I could smell his breath, sour and herbal, and he whispered, "You're not here." Just that. Then he zipped the tent shut, stood up, and called back in a flat voice, "No one here. Keep going." The others started walking again. Back uphill, chanting picked up, slow and methodical. I didn't move. I didn't dare move. I sat there all night, wide awake, back against the tent wall, every sound outside making me flinch. At some point, I think I stopped blinking. When the sky finally started to go gray, I jumped up and packed in record time. Didn't bother folding anything. I shoved gear into my bag, zipped nothing, barely checked for dropped items. I walked fast. Then I ran. Didn't stop to eat. Didn't drink water. I pushed until my legs gave out, then forced them to keep going. When I saw my car, it felt like seeing salvation. I was shaking so bad I dropped my keys twice. By the time the engine turned over, I had tears running down my face. Not from crying, just from the sheer intensity of it all breaking at once. I drove for hours, didn't stop until I was 2 towns away and surrounded by people again. I was 5 days into a solo hike on the Appalachian Trail, somewhere along the Blue Ridge stretch. That's when something started to feel, not wrong exactly, but off. Just enough to make me pause. The trail curved uphill in a lazy, slow bend that didn't match my map, and I'd been double-checking it constantly, syncing it with my GPS. At first, I thought maybe I'd missed a fork, or that the path had shifted over time. Trails evolve. Trees fall, water erodes things, paths get rerouted. But this wasn't subtle. It felt like I was walking into a completely different forest that wasn't supposed to exist. I stopped, pulled off my pack, and tried to figure out where I'd gone wrong. But when I turned to backtrack, everything behind me looked exactly like what was in front. Same trees, same slope, same rocky patches. No markers, no landmarks, no clue where I'd come from. I've done enough solo hiking to know things blend together. When you're alone, your thoughts loop. You lose track of time. You walk farther than you think. But I hadn't zoned out, and it hadn't rained in days. There were no fresh washouts to confuse the trail. Still, I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe I needed food. Maybe I needed rest. My legs ached. I had that strange, low-pressure headache I sometimes get at higher altitudes. But even that didn't explain the feeling in the air. It felt still. Not calm still. Stuck. Like everything had stopped. No birds. No bugs. No wind in the trees. Just nothing. Like the forest was holding its breath. That's when I saw the road. Not a footpath. Not a logging trail. An actual dirt road. Wide, clean, carved through the trees like someone had dragged a blade across the forest and forgotten to tell the map makers. I knew it wasn't on any of my maps. No markings, no fire route number. Just this wide cut in the earth, turning slowly off to the right, like it had a destination it wasn't in a hurry to reveal. I stood there for a long time, staring. The road looked used, faint tire grooves smoothed by weather. Small stones pushed outward by something heavy that had passed again and again, but no footprints. No broken branches, just a road that didn't belong. I should have turned around, but I didn't. I started walking, figuring maybe it led to a ranger station, or an old back route that had been forgotten. I even told myself it might loop back to a known trail, just a detour. Nothing more. The road stretched on, quiet and even. After maybe 30 minutes, the forest opened into a small clearing. Not like a meadow, more like a wound. A circle of dry leaves and dirt sloping slightly downhill. Exposed roots twisting up from the ground. It all looked too perfect. At the far edge stood a wooden shelter. Hand-built, old. 3 walls and a roof, open at the front. A big stone chimney blackened with soot. In front of it, arranged in a curve, were 7 stools. Small, handmade, stripped of bark. Each the same size and shape, but imperfect, like they'd been carved by hand and measured by eye. That detail stuck with me. They weren't random logs. Someone had crafted them, smoothed them, spent time on them. The fire pit in front of the chimney was ringed with mossy stones. I stepped closer. Ash lay in the middle. Gray, loose, not fresh. But when I held my hand above it, it was still warm. Not hot, just warm, recent. Maybe that morning, maybe moments before I arrived. That should have been comforting. It meant I wasn't alone, that someone had passed through. But the clearing was silent, dead silent. No birds, no insects, no leaves. Nothing moved. That's when the wrongness hit me. A pressure in my chest, like I was being watched from the trees. Not with curiosity, not with fear. with expectation. I pulled out my phone, snapped the photo. The second the shutter clicked, I regretted it. It was like I'd spoken in a church. I turned and left, retracing my steps. But the road looked different now, wider, flatter, like the trees had pulled back. I couldn't tell, I just knew I needed to move faster. That night, I pitched my tent on a ridge. I didn't bother cooking. I curled into my bag, desperate for daylight, but I kept hearing sounds. Soft, close. Footsteps in dry leaves. A slow crunch, then silence. Then again, closer. Around midnight, I heard breathing, right outside the tent. Slow, wet, like someone with a cold standing inches from the nylon. Waiting. I didn't move. I didn't blink. When morning came, I crawled out. The ground around my tent was covered in prints. Not boots, not paws, not paws. Hands, human hands. Human hands pressed flat into the dirt, fingers spread wide. 14 of them, forming a lopsided ring. I packed in minutes, didn't brush my teeth, just shoved everything into my pack and started hiking. I was supposed to reach the Lake Jacassi overlooked by dusk, but nothing looked familiar. Trail markers were gone. The terrain felt rearranged, like the forest had shifted overnight. My GPS spun erratically, sharp, twitchy rotations, like he couldn't tell which way was real. At one point, I passed a crooked pine with a V-shaped trunk. 20 minutes later, I passed it again, then again. I was walking in a slow, perfect arc. Eventually, I broke through brush into the same clearing, same shelter, same 7 stools. Only this time, the fire pit was smoking. No flames, just a slow curl of white smoke, rising steady, like someone had just stood up and walked away. I didn't go near it. I didn't take another picture. I turned and walked the other way, straight through the woods. No trail, no direction, just anything that kept the smoke behind me. By sunset, I was scratched, bleeding, exhausted, no closer to safety. I rolled out my bag on a patch of rock and stared at the stars, too tired to eat, too wired to sleep. My legs itched, not like bug bites, like something moving under the skin, buzzing nerves. I kept checking. Nothing, no welts, no marks, just the sensation. When I woke, I was shivering. My breath fogged the air. Everything was still, too still. There was weight behind me. I turned slowly. The chimney, right there, close enough to touch. The clearing had found me again. Or maybe I'd never left. The stools were in a circle now, tighter, close enough I couldn't step between them without touching one. And they looked darker, slick, like they'd been dragged through water. I stood frozen. Then I saw the carvings, letters, one on each stool. MH. The second stool, MH again. The third, the fourth, all of them. My initials, carved deep. The bark around them blackened and split. I didn't think, I just ran. I don't know where. I just kept moving until sunrise, then farther still. My legs shook, my mouth was dry. My mind barely held together. Eventually, I hit a gravel path. Not marked, not familiar, but real. I followed it for hours until a ranger's truck appeared. The woman inside looked stunned, like she hadn't expected to find anyone. She gave me water, asked if I was hurt. I couldn't answer. I just stared past her, into the woods waiting for smoke. 2 days later, I returned with friends. We hiked every path, every offshoot, every patch of forest I described. I gave them coordinates, described the shelter, the stools. Nothing. No road, no clearing, no structure, just trees. They joked, said I must have been turned around. Maybe I dreamed it, but I know what I saw. The scratches faded, the itching stopped, but sometimes, just before sunrise, I wake with that smell in my nose. Burning pine, sharp, cold. And sometimes, I dream of the clearing again. Only this time, I'm not outside standing at the trees. I'm inside the circle, and I'm not alone.